Okay, so uh, you sent over a whole stack of stuff about energy, articles, reports, even some YouTube videos. Looks like you're really digging into U.S. energy policy, maybe even global trends too.
Yeah, it's a big topic.
It is. Well, strap in because we're going to unpack some fascinating ideas from Chris Wright, the current U.S. Secretary of Energy.
Oh, yeah, I know him.
You might know him as an energy entrepreneur. He founded Liberty Energy, a major player in the shale oil boom.
Yeah, his background definitely adds a unique dimension to his take on things.
Yeah.
He's got this core message that really sets the stage for everything.
What's that?
If you get energy wrong, nothing else matter.
That's a pretty bold statement.
Uh,
And it gets even more interesting when you look at some of the specific claims he's making.
like what?
A $4 trillion malinvestment in wind solar and batteries. The sinister nature of the net zero 2050 goal, a coming nuclear renaissance. There's a lot to unpack here.
Absolutely. And given your interest in the future of energy, I think you'll find his perspective quite thought-provoking. Let's start with natural gas. Wright calls it the unexpected champion of the energy world, and he's got the numbers to back it up. Over the past 15 years, natural gas has been the fastest growing energy source globally. It's actually responsible for 40% of all global energy consumption growth over that time.
Wow, 40%, that's a huge chunk. But what's especially fascinating is the shift we've seen here in the U.S. We went from being the world's biggest importer of natural gas to the biggest exporter. And get this,
Yeah.
the price Americans pay for natural gas has actually gone down even as we're exporting more. What's the story there?
Well, it's largely thanks to the shale revolution. The one Wright himself was a key player in, and
Really?
the technology for hydraulic fracturing took off, and we saw this massive increase in domestic natural gas production. Think about it. We have over 90% fewer drilling rigs operating in the Gulf today than we did 15 years ago, yet we're producing more natural gas than ever.
That's pretty remarkable. It really shows how technological innovation can completely reshape an industry.
It really does. And what's even more interesting is how Wright connects natural gas to a much broader vision. He's not just talking about heating your home, he's talking about global food security. Natural gas is a key ingredient in producing nitrogen fertilizer, which is essential for modern agriculture. Without it, global food production would be cut in half.
Wow, I didn't realize that connection. So it's about way more than just keeping our houses warm in the winter.
Exactly. And Wright points out that natural gas is also crucial for the petrochemical industry, which makes everything from plastics to synthetic materials. So we're talking about food production materials for construction, even things like clothing. All of these are connected to natural gas. It's a really central part of our modern way of life, even if most people don't realize it.
That's fascinating. It makes you think about all the hidden connections in our energy systems. And it sounds like natural gas is going to be even more important for electricity generation in the years to come.
Wright definitely thinks so. Right now, it's about 43% of U.S. electricity production, but he predicts that it could hit 50% in the next few years. This is actually kind of surprising because a lot of analysts thought its use in electricity would level off.
So Wright is going against the grain here. That's interesting. He also talks about the potential for natural gas to transform the Northeast, especially places like New England and Long Island that are still heavily reliant on fuel oil for heating.
You're right, he sees a huge opportunity to bring down energy costs for consumers in those areas and to reduce emissions at the same time. Natural gas is about 4 times cheaper than heating oil, and it burns much cleaner, so the potential benefits are significant.
That sounds like a win-win.
Yeah.
So what's stopping us from making the switch?
Well, the biggest roadblock is actually getting the natural gas to those places. We need pipelines, and that's where things get complicated. Projects like the Constitution Pipeline and the Northeast Supply Enhancement Pipeline, both of which Wright mentions specifically, have faced huge political obstacles.
So politics are getting in the way, even when there's a clear economic and environmental benefit. That's frustrating.
Unfortunately, it's a recurring theme in the energy world.
Speaking of challenges,
Ah,
you flagged some pretty alarming information about electricity prices. They've been rising steadily here in the U.S. and globally, even though energy demand has been relatively flat for the past 20 years.
mm-hmm.
That doesn't seem right.
You're right to be concerned about that trend.
Mhm.
Ricey points the finger at what he calls political meddling in energy markets. He argues that policies favoring renewable energy sources, things like renewable portfolio standards, have actually driven up costs by forcing us to rely on intermittent sources like wind and solar, which aren't always available when we need them.
So he's saying that we're paying a price for these policies, literally.
Exactly, and he uses a very specific example to drive this point home: the 2025 Inauguration Day cold snap. Remember that? It was freezing.
Oh, yeah. They had to cancel the outdoor inauguration ceremony for the first time in 40 years. What does that have to do with energy?
Well, that night, as temperatures plummeted and energy demand soared, the PJM interconnection, that's the regional grid covering 12 states and 65 million people, including Washington, D.C., was put to the test. And guess what? Only 2% of the electricity they were generating came from wind and solar combined. And solar, it contributed absolutely nothing.
Zero. Wow.
Yeah,
That's
that
when we really needed those renewable sources to kick in.
Exactly. It highlights the limitations of relying on these intermittent sources, especially during times of peak demand. And here's another sobering fact. Wright points out that even with all the advances in battery technology, all the batteries in the world combined could only store less than 2 minutes of global power generation.
Whoa, that puts things in perspective. So even with all the hype about batteries, we're still a long way from being able to rely on them for consistent power.
That's what Wright is arguing. He believes we need to be much more pragmatic and focus on solutions that can deliver reliable, affordable energy today while continuing to invest in innovation for the future. It's not about picking one energy source over another. It's about having a diverse portfolio that can meet our needs under any circumstances.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Now, you also flagged manufacturing as a key part of the energy equation. It's not something most people think about when they think about energy.
You're right, it often gets overlooked. But Wright points out that manufacturing accounts for a whopping 44% of global energy consumption, even more than transportation. To put it in perspective, last year, the U.S. consumed about 25 exajoules of energy for manufacturing. That's a hard number to grasp.
Yeah.
So think of it this way. That's enough energy to power every home in the U.S. for an entire year. But guess how much China consumed?
Oh, I'm intrigued. Lay it on me.
A staggering 70 exajoules, almost 3 times as much as the U.S. And that difference really reflects the fact that we've outsourced a lot of our energy-intensive industries.
So it's like we're exporting our energy consumption along with our manufacturing jobs.
In a way, yes, and this trend has big implications as we enter the age of artificial intelligence, or AI. You see, AI is incredibly energy intensive. We're talking about massive data centers, complex algorithms, and a huge demand for computing power.
So AI is going to be another major driver of energy consumption in the coming years.
Absolutely. And Wright believes that if we want to keep AI manufacturing in the U.S. and maintain our leadership in this critical field, we need to have access to a lot more affordable, reliable power. He's worried that without a significant increase in energy supply, we'll see those massive data centers outbidding regular consumers and driving up electricity prices even further.
So it's a potential double whammy: rising energy demand from AI and potentially even higher electricity prices for everyone else.
Exactly. And it all circles back to Wright's central argument that we need to prioritize energy abundance. If we don't, it could have serious consequences for our economy, our technological competitiveness, and our overall quality of life.
All right, so we've got this potential energy crunch on the horizon,
Yeah.
but it sounds like Wright is at least trying to shift the conversation. He talks about a peak crazy moment, suggesting that maybe the political climate around energy is starting to change.
He's definitely sensing a shift, and he seems optimistic that a more pragmatic approach is gaining traction. He mentions productive conversations he's had with Democratic governors and senators who are starting to feel the heat from those rising energy prices.
So maybe there's hope for some bipartisan consensus on this after all.
It's possible. Wright stresses that real lasting change requires working within the system, finding common ground, and building consensus. He tells a pretty eye-opening story about Puerto Rico, which ran headlong into the limitations of a 100% renewables approach.
Fill me in on that.
Well, after a devastating hurricane knocked out much of their energy infrastructure, the governor who had campaigned on a platform of renewable energy pushed for a 100% renewables future. It sounds great on paper, right?
Yeah.
But it turned into a real cautionary tale. The island ended up with sky-high electricity prices, frequent blackouts, and people started leaving in droves, both residents and businesses. It shows that even with the best of intentions, relying solely on intermittent renewables can have unintended consequences.
It definitely highlights the need for a balanced approach, carefully considering all the factors involved.
Absolutely, and I think that's a key part of Wright's message. He's not against renewables, but he believes they need to be part of a diversified energy portfolio that includes reliable baseload power sources like nuclear and natural gas.
That makes sense. So let's talk about this nuclear renaissance that Wright is so excited about. He seems incredibly bullish on nuclear energy, touting its affordability, reliability, energy density, and potential for scalability. He sees it as a crucial part of our energy future.
He's definitely a strong advocate for nuclear. He points to the Clinch River site in Tennessee, where the Tennessee Valley Authority, or TVA, a massive federally owned corporation that provides power to millions in the Southeast, is building the first small modular reactors, or SMRs, in the U.S.
Hold on, SMRs. Could you unpack that for me?
Sure. SMRs are essentially smaller, more modular versions of traditional nuclear reactors. They're designed to be safer, more efficient, and easier to deploy than their larger counterparts, and Wright sees them as a game changer, especially as the world tries to figure out how to decarbonize.
So SMRs are like the next generation of nuclear technology.
Exactly, and Wright is betting big on them. He's even arguing that market forces alone won't be enough to drive widespread adoption of nuclear, and he is pushing for regulatory changes and economic incentives to help accelerate the process.
It sounds like he's putting his money where his mouth is on this one. In addition to nuclear, he also mentions other areas of focus for the Department of Energy, like geothermal energy. What's the thinking there?
Well, geothermal is another source of clean, reliable power that Wright believes has huge potential. It taps into the heat beneath the Earth's surface to generate electricity. And like with nuclear, he's pushing to remove bureaucratic barriers and streamline the permitting processes for geothermal projects. He really wants to cut through the red tape and make it easier to build the energy infrastructure we need.
It sounds like he's bringing a real sense of urgency to the Department of Energy. Like, we need to be taking action now, not just talking about it.
That's a great observation, and it ties into his view of Europe's energy crisis as a cautionary tale.
Okay, let's talk about Europe. Wright seems pretty critical of their energy policy, saying they've gone the furthest down the road of prioritizing renewables without fully considering the costs and consequences. What's his take on the situation?
He's worried that they've created a system that's become unaffordable and unreliable, and he doesn't want the U.S. to make the same mistakes. He points to the concerns raised by European business leaders like Jim Ratcliffe, the CEO of INEOS, a major chemical company. Ratcliffe has been very outspoken about the destructive impact of high energy prices on European industry.
That makes sense. Manufacturing is incredibly energy intensive, so if energy costs get too high, it makes it really hard to compete globally.
Exactly. And Wright highlights this startling statistic about the United Kingdom. Apparently, over two-thirds of their reduction in greenhouse gas emissions came from simply using less energy.
Wait, so they're not actually becoming more environmentally friendly, they're just becoming poorer.
That's essentially what Wright is arguing. He sees it as a sign of economic decline, not environmental progress. He believes we need to find a way to decarbonize without sacrificing our economies and our standard of living.
That's a pretty sobering thought.
It is, and it's why this deep dive you're doing is so important. It's giving you a chance to really examine these complex issues from multiple angles and consider the potential consequences of different energy choices.
Well, so far, I'm definitely seeing things in a new light.
That's great to hear, and we're just scratching the surface. There's still so much to unpack.
All right, well, let's keep digging.
Sounds good to me. You know, it's really interesting how Wright's background in the private sector seems to be influencing his approach to government.
Totally, it comes through loud and clear. Like when he talks about cutting through red tape at the Department of Energy, or his focus on partnering with businesses to drive those technological advancements, it's definitely a different mindset.
It is, and he's not afraid to challenge conventional wisdom either. Take his view on the net zero 2050 goal, which so many countries and companies have adopted. He actually calls it sinister.
Sinister. That's a pretty loaded word. What's behind that?
He argues that the whole idea of setting this arbitrary target date, regardless of the cost or even whether it's actually feasible, is actually counterproductive. He thinks it distracts from the real work of developing practical, scalable solutions that can actually make a difference.
So it's not that he's against reducing emissions, it's more about the how and the when.
Exactly. He thinks we should be focused on making energy cleaner and more efficient over time, but in a way that doesn't wreck our economies or lower people's standard of living.
He also talks about the need for intellectual honesty in the whole energy and climate debate. He says we need to stop just saying what we think people want to hear and start having more open and honest conversations about the trade-offs and challenges involved. I think a lot of people can relate to that sentiment.
It's a crucial point. It's easy to get caught up in the rhetoric and the grand pronouncements, but real progress requires a willingness to grapple with the complexities of these issues and to consider a range of perspectives.
He brings up Wells Fargo, getting rid of their net zero 2050 goal as a sign that maybe, just maybe, we're starting to move away from that peak crazy and toward a more grounded, realistic approach.
That's a really interesting observation. It does seem like there's a growing recognition that we need to balance our environmental goals with economic realities.
What I find really compelling is his focus on human well-being. It's not just about reducing emissions for the sake of reducing emissions. It's about making sure that people have access to the energy they need to live fulfilling, productive lives that resonates with me.
Absolutely. He firmly believes that energy is a fundamental driver of human progress and that our policies should reflect that. He talks about how greater access to affordable, reliable energy has dramatically improved life expectancy and quality of life globally, and he wants to see those benefits extended to everyone.
And that brings us back to his strong support for expanding natural gas production and exports. He sees it as a way to provide that clean, affordable energy to Americans and our allies around the world, while also boosting our economy and creating jobs here at home.
He talks specifically about his interactions with leaders in Africa and Asia who are eager to partner with the U.S. to develop their own energy resources and improve the lives of their citizens. He contrasts this with what he sees as a more condescending attitude from Europe, which he believes is trying to impose its own energy model on the rest of the world.
He actually uses the word sinister again when he's talking about efforts to prevent developing countries from building coal-fired power plants. I found that part pretty thought-provoking.
He sees it as almost morally wrong to deny people access to the energy they need to lift themselves out of poverty, especially when those advocating for such policies are often living in countries that built their own prosperity on fossil fuels. It's a bit of a double standard.
It is a powerful argument. He's basically saying that we need to be mindful of the needs and aspirations of people all over the world, not just those in wealthy, developed nations.
And that's a recurring theme in his message. He talks about the importance of American leadership in the energy sector, but not in a way that's about dominance or control. It's more about partnership, innovation, and sharing the benefits of abundant, affordable energy.
He seems to have a deep faith in the power of technology to solve problems.
Absolutely. He sees technological advancements as the key to decarbonizing our economies and addressing climate change in a sustainable way.
Like with nuclear power, he's convinced that the nuclear renaissance is happening, and he's putting his weight behind it by supporting the development of next-generation nuclear technologies like those SMRs we talked about.
And it's not just nuclear. He also talks about geothermal energy as a promising source of clean, reliable power. And he emphasizes the need to remove those bureaucratic barriers and streamline permitting processes to accelerate the deployment of all forms of energy infrastructure.
He really does seem to have a sense of urgency about all of this, doesn't he? Like, we need to be acting now, not just talking about it.
I think that's a fair assessment. He sees this as a pivotal moment, a time when we need to make bold decisions about our energy future.
He also seems incredibly frustrated with the inefficiency and roadblocks he's encountering in Washington. He tells a story about a company in the southeastern U.S. that manufactures a popular type of tankless water heater powered by natural gas.
Yes, and this company was on the verge of having its product effectively banned by a regulation from the previous administration.
Wait, ban tankless water heaters? Why?
The regulation was aimed at increasing energy efficiency, but Wright describes it as nonsensical and harmful, both to the company and to consumers who would have lost access to an affordable, efficient product.
So a classic case of good intentions gone wrong.
Exactly, and thankfully the current administration was able to intervene and overturn that regulation. It's a great example of how Wright is trying to use his position to cut through that red tape and unleash the potential of American businesses to innovate and deliver solutions that benefit everyone.
It's also a good reminder that even small regulations can have big unintended consequences. It's a lot to think about.
It is, and Wright is very open about the challenges he's facing in transitioning from the private sector to government. He admits he was initially naive about the levers of power and the complexities of working within a large bureaucracy.
I can imagine it's a whole different world.
It is, and he talks about the importance of building consensus and working within the political system to achieve lasting change. He acknowledges that he won't be able to get everything on his wish list done, but he's determined to make progress on the issues that matter most.
I can respect it. It sounds like he's learning as he goes, adapting his approach as he gains a deeper understanding of the political landscape.
He is, and he's surrounding himself with really talented people who share his vision and passion for energy. He mentions Dario Gil, the head of IBM Research, and a pioneer in quantum computing who's now serving as Undersecretary for Science. And he brought in a former head of FERC, that's the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, who has deep expertise in electricity markets.
It's encouraging to hear that he's attracting that kind of top talent to the Department of Energy.
It suggests that there's a sense of excitement and optimism about the direction he's taking the department.
And it sounds like he's genuinely motivated by a desire to serve his country and make a positive impact. He talks about being shocked by the number of people who reached out to offer their help and expertise when he was nominated.
It seems like his message of energy abundance, innovation, and common sense is resonating with a lot of people.
It's definitely resonating with me. This deep dive has been incredibly insightful.
It's amazing how interconnected energy policy is to so many other aspects of our lives. The economy, technology, national security, it all ties back to energy.
It's also clear that there's no one-size-fits-all solution. We need to embrace a diverse range of energy sources, promote innovation, and make decisions based on facts and sound analysis, not ideology or political expediency.
That's a fantastic takeaway from this deep dive. We need to move beyond the simplistic narratives and engage in more thoughtful and nuanced discussions about how to power our future.
And it all starts with being informed, which is exactly what you're doing with this deep dive. So kudos to you.
Absolutely. The more we understand about the challenges and opportunities in the energy sector, the better equipped we'll be to make informed decisions that benefit both ourselves and future generations.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground, and I feel like we're just getting warmed up. Shall we continue exploring Wright's perspective? All right, so we've covered a lot of ground from natural gas and nuclear power to the situation in Europe and the challenges Wright faces in Washington. What's the overall takeaway from this deep dive into his views on energy?
I think what's fascinating here is that he's advocating for a real paradigm shift in how we approach energy policy. It's not about picking winners and losers among different energy sources or chasing arbitrary targets like net zero 2050.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that energy underpins modern society
Right.
and focusing our policies on ensuring an abundance of affordable, reliable, and secure energy. It's the foundation for everything else.
And it comes back to that core message of his, if you get energy wrong, nothing else matters.
Right, and it makes you think, doesn't it, everything we do, growing our food, manufacturing goods, powering our homes and businesses, all of it hinges on access to energy. If that energy is too expensive, unreliable, or scarce, the consequences ripple through the entire economy.
Yeah, and his perspective on climate change seems to be gaining traction. He's not denying the science, but he is pushing back against what he sees as overly simplistic or ideologically driven solutions.
Right. He's making a case for a more balanced approach, one that weighs the costs and benefits of different policies and prioritizes solutions that deliver tangible results without burdening consumers or hindering economic growth.
Yeah, it feels like he's trying to bring some common sense back into the conversation.
You're right. He's challenging the status quo and making us re-examine some of our assumptions about energy policy. Agree with him or not, his perspective is worth considering.
For sure. He also highlighted the role innovation plays in addressing these challenges. Like you mentioned, the shale revolution, which he was part of, totally changed the U.S. energy landscape. It makes you wonder what other breakthroughs are on the horizon.
Absolutely. He sees huge potential in next-generation nuclear power, advanced geothermal technologies, even carbon capture and storage. He really believes that embracing innovation and supporting research and development are key to a cleaner and more sustainable energy future without sacrificing economic prosperity.
It sounds like he's really putting his faith in the power of human ingenuity to solve these big problems.
He is, and he's a big believer in free markets. And the ability of the private sector to drive that innovation, he's actually quite critical of what he sees as excessive government intervention in the energy sector. He feels that unleashing American businesses and entrepreneurs is the best path to energy abundance and technological progress.
Yeah, that entrepreneurial spirit definitely comes through in everything he says.
It does, and he's not just focused on America. He sees a role for U.S. leadership in the global energy market, not through dominance or control, but through partnership and collaboration, sharing the benefits of affordable, reliable energy with the world.
So it's about lifting others up, not holding them back.
Exactly. He sees a huge opportunity to help developing countries access the energy they need to grow their economies and improve the lives of their people, while also promoting environmental sustainability.
It's a really different way of framing the conversation about energy and climate change, isn't it? It's not about imposing our values or our solutions on others. It's about finding common ground and working together to create a more prosperous and sustainable future for everyone.
It's a vision that's both pragmatic and optimistic. He sees a path forward that balances environmental stewardship with economic growth and technological advancement.
So what does all of this mean for you, the listener? What should you take away from this deep dive?
Well, the biggest takeaway, I think, is to think critically about energy. Don't just accept the prevailing narratives or the simplistic solutions. Dig deeper. Ask questions. Consider the trade-offs.
Yeah, what are the real costs and benefits of different energy sources and technologies?
Right.
How can we balance environmental goals with economic realities? These are
Yeah.
questions that everyone should be asking.
Exactly. And how do we make sure that everyone, not just a select few, has access to the energy they need to thrive? It's about becoming more informed and engaged citizens, taking ownership of our energy future, and demanding solutions that work for all of us.
That's a powerful message. Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, explored a range of perspectives, and hopefully sparked some thought-provoking questions for you to ponder. Thanks for joining us on this journey, and remember,
If you get energy wrong, nothing else matters.
we'll see you next time.